Hello, everyone. This is Francesca Vigliani from Cloud Academy. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on moving from ARM templates to Azure Bicep Templates. It's very exciting to see so many of you connected to this session. I'm seeing people from all sorts of places, from the UK, from Italy, from the US. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to be with us for another exciting session with Cloud Academy experts. So before we introduce our speaker, just a few housekeeping announcements as usual. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you via email. At the end, we will hold a Q&A session, so feel free to submit your questions through the chat box. And let's see who did their homework. Did you set up the environment in advance? If not, please go to the GitHub repo we shared and be sure you clone it on your local environment. If you already did it, please pull up the latest version. I will be sharing it in the chat, so look out for that link over there. And I think that's about it in terms of our pre-webinar announcements. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our Azure Cloud Labs developer, Adil-Ul Islam.
Hi guys, I hope you're well. It's so scary, but also wonderful to see so many people trying to tune in to see how they can move their ARM templates over to Azure Bicep Templates. As mentioned, I am a Azure Cloud Labs developer for Cloud Academy, and my main focus is obviously Azure, and I love Azure, and I love everything about Azure. And today, hopefully, we'll be able to see how we can move those pesky ARM templates to Azure Bicep Templates. Just a bit of a background, I actually have experience as an Azure engineer and also have been working in cloud for the last couple of years, but I am also fairly young. I'm only 25, so I've really sort of fallen, you could say, born into the cloud, as it were, because most of my career has been sort of around Azure and the cloud. But without further ado, let's kind of see what's on the agenda today. We'll be going through mainly 5 sections, and I broke it down very simply. I didn't want to go into too much detail here, but you'll kind of see what we're talking about as we go through each of these sections. And the first bit is of course the theory. What is Bicep Templates? What are Bicep Templates? Why would you want to move over to Bicep Templates? And what's the process of pretty much doing so? We'll have a practical after that, a sort of lab demo. That's where you'll be using the templates mentioned in the repository on GitHub. The process, well, we kind of look at a summary of what it takes to actually do so, to actually move over to Azure Bicep Templates, and some of the errors and fixes that may be needed in between. We'll cover that certainly later. And the future of Azure Bicep. What's really, is Azure Bicep here to stay, or is it just a fad for the current time? And finally, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the questions. Cool. So I'll just begin. So just before we actually start, so in terms of the resources, the GitHub repo has been provided to all you guys. So please go on there and get the templates, the template and the parameter file along with that. If you want to follow along, there's no obligation to, but if you did want to follow along, make sure you have an IDE environment and a terminal at hand. And you will need the AZ or AZ CLI, or just the AZ Bicep CLI. If you just quickly pop it on Google, it will appear. And then for your correct version, whether it's Mac, Linux, or Windows, make sure you download the correct version. It doesn't take at all long to install. But once that's done and ready, you're pretty much ready to follow along as needs be. So I'll just say it one more time. So the repo, if you haven't got it already, please go on the repo. Make sure you have an IDE environment so we can actually mess about and have a look at these templates, and a terminal so we can use the Bicep CLI.
Yes, Adil, I've just shared it in the chat. So if you didn't have the link, just look up in the chat and you'll have the repo there.
Fantastic. Cool. I'll move on. Some useful prerequisites at home. At Cloud Academy have a bunch of Bicep template labs. If you're a beginner to Bicep templates, then certainly look at our introductory Bicep template content. We have our usual introduction lab, but as well as a sort of more specific labs based around what you can do with these Bicep templates, such as utilizing parameter files, as well as challenges as well. So you can actually test yourself. You won't be really given much instruction, but you have a chance to kind of do things by yourself, instructionless, and try and complete the challenge. But then very specifically around sort of converting ARM to Bicep, we have our Converting ARM to Bicep lab, as well as challenge, and we have a real-time conversion playground coming soon. I actually hope it will be published soon after this webinar. So do hang on for that. If it's not today, then it certainly will be tomorrow. So it should be within the next couple of days. You'll have that playground ready and sorted, so you can actually mess about in your own time in a nice environment, a sandboxed environment for these Bicep templates, called Converting to Bicep Templates, I should say. Again, all found on cloudacademy.com. Cool. The theory. So what is Bicep and why is it so useful? And my little slogan, why are my arms hurting? Bicep is this new language from Microsoft, and it just makes it so much easier to work with. So if you're familiar with ARM templates, which I hope some of you are at least, you will know that it's written in a language called JSON. And usually you have it Azure deploy.json. That's the default Microsoft terminology for an ARM template. But you'll know that when it comes to ARM templates, when they start to get big and complex, they get really, really unwieldy and hard to author, but also hard to amend and read. And for any poor sod who has to actually take over from a senior engineer, you'll know how annoying it is to look through their ARM templates that they've written everything in just one template or a couple of templates, and trying to maneuver through these templates is certainly not the greatest experience. So Microsoft actually have listened to their audience and their complaints about ARM templates, and have found an easier way to actually interact with infrastructure as code by using the Bicep language. And the Bicep language is wonderful because it mimics kind of like the YAML language. And we'll have a look at how it looks in the comparison between ARM and Bicep shortly. But effectively, it makes it easier to author, easier to read as well. And that certainly makes for a better experience when it comes to writing your infrastructure as code. So as mentioned, the ARM templates are written in JSON, but the Azure Bicep templates are written in Microsoft's own language called a domain-specific language called Bicep. And it simplifies, as I meant, the authoring experience you have with resource manager templates. So can you really do much with Bicep? How is it compared to ARM templates? So for a while, Bicep was actually in preview, but actually it has been for a little while now in general availability. So it's now GA, which means that it is very, very well supported, and Microsoft won't just axe it when they don't like it. It's out of preview. So that's fantastic news for everyone who wants to actually start off their journey with infrastructure as code. They can just start with Bicep. They don't need to start with ARM, and they can just start writing the infrastructure in Bicep from scratch. It's wonderful. And because it's written by Microsoft, you get fantastic support with it. Immediate support, in fact, for new services from Microsoft. So your templates, as soon as a new service comes out, you'll find that Bicep usually has immediate support for it, whereas other infrastructure code services such as Terraform, Pulumi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, may not have immediate support for a lot of these services from Azure, especially not the preview services from Microsoft. There are a road of issues dealt with Microsoft, so there's open source contribution on the GitHub repository whenever there's an issue with Bicep, and we're actually going to come to something shortly about that in terms of bug fixes and issues, and Microsoft can effectively update the Bicep language and your templates in a nice way so that you can actually rectify these issues when you update. And one wonderful thing about Bicep is that it can dynamically detect dependencies between resources. So it makes it even easier to author templates. Give me 1 second. Cool. So why should you convert your ARM templates? You have all these ARM templates lying around. Let's say in a typical environment, one single MSP service provider could have hundreds of ARM templates that they use to build infrastructures and environments for their clients. Why would you want to convert these ARM templates? So first, you have to look at the benefits that a Bicep template can actually have. And so of what I just mentioned, there's support for all resource types and API versions, especially like I mentioned, preview and general availability as well. So other infrastructure as code providers may not have that facility. It's simple syntax. We're going to see this shortly, literally in the next slide, how simple it is if you haven't seen it already. And it's got a lot of modularity, so you can actually break it apart into manageable bite-sized pieces called modules and link them together. If you know in ARM templates, sort of like linked templates and nested templates, you can do pretty much the same thing with Bicep templates, but small modules. You have integration with Azure services, such as Azure Policy, template specs, and blueprints. And there's no cost. It's open source, which is fantastic. So it's Bicep's completely free. You don't have to pay for any premium capabilities. And as mentioned, it's supported by Microsoft and Microsoft support as well. So you can actually contact Microsoft if you have any issues with Bicep. If you want to read more on these details in particular, just Google what is Bicep, and it will be in the Microsoft documentation, specifically under that title, what is Bicep, under the overview dropdown. And this is actually very much showing the difference between a Bicep template and an ARM template. This is the same template. These do exactly the same thing. The ARM template on the right that you see there deploys, I actually can't remember, I think it's a storage account. So it's one simple thing there, and literally the same thing as a Bicep template that we have on the left here. No difference at all. So there's a huge benefit to using Bicep templates in readability and authourability as well. So as I mentioned, it's pretty much literally less than half the size. It will obviously depend what you have included in your Bicep template, but you can see significant size reduction. Now, this specific webinar isn't about writing Bicep templates from scratch, because that's fantastic and you can actually use it from scratch. Again, it's GA as well, and it's not in preview, and it's well supported. Bicep is fantastic. What this webinar is about is specifically converting ARM templates to Bicep templates. And that is the question. Is it the perfect solution? We'll find out that it is a best effort process. Actually, this is the warning that comes up, the error code that comes up when you actually try to do a decompilation or conversion rather of an ARM template to a Bicep template. It tells you it is a best effort process, and there is no guaranteed mapping, i.e. a one-to-one mapping from your ARM template, your JSON template, to a Bicep template. And you may need to fix warnings and errors that are maybe generated in the Bicep template. So you need to actually look at it on a case-by-case basis. Is it worth my time to convert these templates, these ARM templates that I have, into Bicep templates, or should I author them from scratch? We're going to go into a flowchart after we do our demonstration that will actually hopefully make it easy for you to understand what process you should take or business decision you should take within your team when it comes to using Bicep. And the final warning or caution here that Microsoft actually give on the documentation is there is an attempt to convert the file, but there's no guaranteed mapping from the ARM template JSON to Bicep. So you may need to, again, fix those warnings and errors. And if there are any issues, you are highly, highly advised and recommended to create issue on the GitHub, for the Bicep GitHub. Cool, the practical. So let's actually try and see what we can do for this practical. I'm going to actually go to VS Code first. So this is one of the ARM templates that we have. This ARM template in particular is the one from the repository. If you haven't actually downloaded it or not, you still have the opportunity to do it now and get it ready. But it'll be this ARM template here, the Azure deploy.json. So this Azure deploy.json, it just deploys three things. It deploys a web app, an app service plan, and an insight resource as well. An app insight resource as well, sorry. So just three things, very simple. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be converting this JSON file to a Bicep file. Just going to be the same file, but we're going to be using the AZ CLI or the Bicep CLI, which is just a smaller version of the AZ CLI, just to do Bicep specific things, and hopefully see what we can get out of that. See if there are any errors, correct them, and then see if we can then use this Bicep template going forward. So to actually convert an ARM template to a Bicep template in the terminal, as long as you've installed the AZ CLI or the Bicep CLI specifically, you want to type in AZ or AZ for your American folk. I'm from the UK, so I have to use Z. AZ or AZ, Bicep, Bicep, and the conversion word is decompile. So that's AZ Bicep decompile, and you want to mention the file, so you can use this double dash file or just -f. And if you're already within your local folder for where the JSON file is located, then just mention the JSON file. And so I'll say that one more time. So it's AZ Bicep decompile, spaces in between these words, -f, and then the name of the file. So Azure deploy.json. If you're not obviously in the location of that file, then make sure you specify the location in front of the name of the file. Cool. So click enter on that, and we'll actually hopefully watch it do its best process decompilation. I'll just open the terminal a little bigger and see what's happened. Cool. It's actually tried to do a deployment here. So if we go to our workspace now, just so we can see it, we'll notice that it's just created this Azure deploy.bicep file. We've actually got a few errors that have come up as well. So what I'm going to do, because it's not actually clear the way it's actually come up, I'm going to make a new text file so we can hopefully see it together. And that was not nice. We don't need to worry about that. We can try and pick it up from here anyway, so it's not that deep. Cool. So we have the original warning that tells us that it's a best effort process, and it tells us a couple of things and where there are warnings. So they're not errors as such, because the main thing is our bicep file actually got created. So there was nothing too wrong with the original ARM template that we had, but some things actually came about as a result of it, and some errors actually came on the bicep template, out of the bicep template. So we need to make sure, is this bicep template actually deployable? So let's just have a look at these errors here. So the first error we see is the property name is not allowed on objects of type site properties. So if we look here, that's referring to this one here. So the properties of this web app, it's saying we don't need this thing here. Okay, cool. That's the first one. The next one, it says that property metadata is not allowed on objects of the type site config. So we can see this metadata property here. Subproperty is not allowed of the property site config. So obviously these issues and errors would differ from case to case and from template to template. You can't necessarily expect that the same error will prop up each time you do a conversion. And that's why you need to look at these errors specifically and see what you can do. Now, before we actually work on all these errors, the main thing we need to realize was the bicep template did get created. That's really important, because the fact the bicep template did get created means the conversion was, we can say at least, somewhat successful. It actually created a bicep template out of our ARM template. Okay, so the only thing we need to know now is this bicep template deployable? Can it actually deploy? And if it's deployable, then potentially some of these errors are just red herrings. It's not a real error that is problematic as such. And that's something, again, work on a case-to-case basis, a template basis. So let's actually just make this go down a bit. So you can see here is the bicep template. And if we actually go back to the original ARM template, you can actually see it's actually much smaller as well. So it's the ARM template, and that's the bicep template. Cool. So the first thing I said was, before we do anything else, is we want to actually try and deploy this this template. See if it's actually deployable. And if it's deployable, then that's great. So you can see here, what I've done is I've used the CLI, and I'm going to be using the CLI to deploy this into Azure. The simple deployment command is AZ deployment group create, again spaces between all of those. I've just specified the name of the deployment with -n, the file that I'm deploying, the actual bicep file, the resource group that I'm deploying to, and the parameter file. So if you're following along at home, you need to make sure that you're able to deploy this file in a similar way. You can also use PowerShell if you're not comfortable using the Azure AZ CLI when it comes to actually deploying the template to Azure. But if you are comfortable and you can follow along because you've now installed hopefully the AZ CLI, then please do that. So let's click enter. Let's actually wait for that to start running. And we're hoping that this will actually deploy. So the same error just appeared again, telling us a few properties that are not allowed. And it seems as though the deployment is running perfectly, which is great. So this is actually one of the best case scenarios, and it's actually fantastic. If we have errors that still allow us to deploy our templates, then these errors aren't huge errors that can actually destroy or break systems. A lot of the time, actually, all it is that when Microsoft have actually created this bicep language, they may have missed some things out. So it's useful to do some further research to find out what it is that could have been missed up. And we're going to do some deep dives on those as well in just a second. In the meantime, though, what we can say is that one thing you will need to do is change the symbolic names. So as you can see, the symbolic names of these resources aren't exactly intuitive about what they are. So it just says app plan name _ resource because it used the app plan name to create the resource. We can see here, this is the app plan. For the next one, we can see it's the web app. that just means it's the web app, that resource. And we can also see for this one, we have the insight component resource as well. Cool. So what you would like to do is you would want to change these pieces here. So I'd probably call this app plan. So that's now the resource app plan. It's a symbolic name. You can change the name of it. This now currently, again, we're not going through the specifics of a bicep template. What's happening here, because this is in blue, it's referring to the parameter app plan name, the details of which is in the parameter JSON app plan name. So you can see that here. So that's just pulling that information from there. You can see that any reference to that app plan might have changed. So we need to change the symbolic name elsewhere as well. App plan, you can see actually appears here. So that's now referencing that resource here for that variable. So what it's doing here, this variable app plan ID, the name of the variable, is grabbing the app plan, that resource, and grabbing the ID from it. Very easy. Oops. And we'll do the same thing for the web app. So the web app again needs to be named accordingly. I'm just calling it web app to make it simple, but you obviously want to make sure you name it something according to best practices. What we can see is that, again, another reference to the resources here, it depends on a resource. So we want to make sure it's the same resource as a symbolic name for that resource. So this is the web app. This resource here is the app plan. And so the app plan actually requires a dependency from the web app. Cool. Did I make this the right way around? I did this the wrong way around. Apologies. Let's go back up there. I knew something was seeming a bit weird. Here's the app plan. And the web app we're creating depends on the app plan. So here, we want to change that to app plan. So what we're saying is here, before I create the web app, I want to create the app plan first. And then if the service plan is created, then create the web app. And so just make sure all the references are correct. And the final one that we created for the resource was not this one. So let's go back here. I'll change that again. I did name the wrong thing. So this one's the web app, and we know it's the web app because it says Microsoft.web/sites. It's red only because we named this one. And this is the app sites resource. So I've named it accordingly, and all the names are as I believe they should be. So let's see, the name of this web app is app name, the property is app name, that's taken from here, that's taken from here. The only one that needs to be changed is the name of the application insights. You can call that. In fact, let's keep that because that's going to be the name of it, and call it insights. Cool. So we know that that's there. Fantastic. So let's track back for a second and see what we did. We converted the bicep template from the ARM template to the bicep template using the Azure CLI. We've found out that it actually successfully created the bicep template, though it gave us a couple of errors. Right now, we also tested quickly deploying it to Azure just to see if it would deploy, and it was successful, and we're just going to go check that now. And in the meantime, what we were doing was making sure the symbolic names of this new bicep template that we created had useful and easy to understand names. So anyone who looks at this knows exactly what this is. So they see this resource, they know this is a service plan. They see this resource, they know it's a web app, and they see this resource, they know it's an application insight resource. Simple as that. We did this while we were waiting for our resource to deploy. So let's actually have a look if that deployed or not. So refresh this. Fantastic. We can actually see that our resource actually deployed, and it deployed very well. If we go to deployments, we'd also see it there too. What about these red bits here? Do we need to correct them? So sometimes you do actually need to correct them. In our case here, fantastically, we didn't need them at all, which is great. What we'll do, actually, I'll just delete these resources here. And with the changes that we've made, here, we're going to deploy it again to see if those changes reflect and if we're actually still able to deploy this template. So with the first error that we got the error here. So in this error, we found out that the property name is not allowed on objects of type site properties. And if you look at all the other permissible properties, the ones that are included underneath the properties property, you can see it doesn't actually require anything there. So actually, you probably could completely get rid of this one. We've actually got the name of the app, the logical name that we're actually giving it, the resource name, sorry, underneath the resource. So we don't need this property anymore because the name's already given here. So by that deduction, we can actually get rid of that one specifically. Cool. Let's look at the metadata now. So now this one's a weird one. And the reason why it's a weird one is because if we go to a deployment via the portal, so I've previously done a deployment via the portal just to make sure everything could work as we need it to. And when I looked at the ARM template that came out of that deployment, and if you want to know how to do that for people who don't, make sure you're on your resource group and you go to deployments. Have a look at the deployment you're looking at, go to the deployment, go to template, and have a look at the template. And you'll notice in the template, it mentions metadata, name, value, which tells us what stack you're using, basically. However, in the Azure deploy.bicep, we're getting an error that says, well, metadata is not allowed as part of this property. Now, given that Microsoft actually are using ARM templates and giving me the ARM template for it, it's probably the case that there is a missing validation for this specific sub-property of the property site config. So what you'd need to do is go through a process of actually looking at each individual error, going from the most specific to the most generic. Now, the best way I do that is I actually just try and copy the error that comes up. So if this, for example, says the property metadata is not allowed in objects of site config, I'd grab that, I'd throw that into Google, and I'd see the error that comes up. Now, some people have actually typed in their specific errors that they've found, and someone actually did it here, and they've actually did what they were supposed to do and actually posted it into the Bicep repo under the Azure repo. So here we can actually see that there is an inaccuracy. Someone's actually posted this in as a ticket. They've got that issue as well, where they've written the metadata with the current stack of the value, and they're getting the same bug. The property metadata is not allowed in objects of type site config. And they have the same issue. It compiles and works, but it does give a warning. So if you were to read this, they will say basically, it just needs to be added to the Swagger spec. Basically, it's going to be added to the update, which is fantastic, which is what we want. And eventually, hopefully, this is going to be added. And this is really recently, actually. This is just June of this year. So hopefully, it'll be added into the next update. But what we do know is that did not break our template, and we compared it to a template from the portal. So we know that this is going to be working, hopefully correctly, as we've seen it does. We can now go a bit more generic. Let's say we need to see errors that maybe this didn't give us enough error. Let's have a look at errors in the missing type validation and inaccuracies. You can have a look at other errors and inaccuracies that people have posted about the Bicep language and templates and see what's come up. A lot of people post their problems here, and this is where you should post your problems as well if you see anything. So for example, people are getting warnings about resource type does not have types available. And so there are, again, various different things that might be missing that hopefully will be added into the validation. You can go one higher as well and actually just look at general Bicep issues overall on the Bicep repo and see all the different problems that you may have. So the reason why I'm mentioning all these things is this is the sort of process you'll follow whenever you have an error that comes to your Bicep template that you've created as a result of decompiling or converting your ARM template. Each error will be different. And so that's why it's important that you go and do the correct research to find out what that error is. They won't always be the same. This is a specific one. Maybe you'll have this error if you ever try to convert a web app ARM template into a Bicep template. So this is a very, very specific one. And one thing actually I missed, which is really important, is we can actually have a look at the Microsoft.web web app ARM template, just a piece of the resource that will be used in an ARM template on the Microsoft website. So you can actually have a look at your specific resource. Oops. You can actually have a look at your specific resource on Google and see what kind of properties should it have. So now when we look at the JSON, which is the ARM template for the web app, we notice that under site config, it doesn't mention metadata, which is the one that came up as a problem. Yet in this template, metadata appears. clearly under the ARM template. Now, clearly there's some kind of inconsistency there, and that inconsistency is something you'd want to raise to Microsoft saying, hey, the documentation says one thing, but actually in practice, the deployment template from the portal says that you can actually use it, and in fact, you guys are using it because clearly it's in the template. That can happen. It's also rare as well. But in this case specifically, I wanted to show an error that where it does happen. Now, if you look, they also thankfully give you a Bicep tab as well, so you can look at how it would look like in Bicep. This is actually what the validation is looking through. They're looking through this Bicep template here for the resource, that snippet, and they're looking on the site config and they say, hey, well, there's no metadata here, and that's hence why we're getting this error saying the property metadata is not allowed in objects of site of type site config. So those are the main ways that you'd actually go about looking for errors in your Bicep template. Cool. So what's really important is that Azure Bicep is continually being worked on. Sometimes you'll find an error that's really easily fixable. It actually is a valid error from your original ARM template, and you want to change it on your Bicep template. Great, fantastic. You'll make the change because it's really easily shown and explained in that little error that comes up in the terminal. But sometimes you have to do a bit more of a deep dive, and it really just depends on your ARM template, the complexity of your ARM template, and the specifics of your ARM template as well. That was really important, and I actually kind of want to come to a tangent here. Where do you have ARM templates? I've worked in companies that have ARM templates that are just massive. People write everything and anything in there, but it works. And it's just from the fact that it works, which is very lazy, they use those ARM templates. We're going to come across now in the process, which is the next section of this, which is, okay, it works, but does that mean I should try and convert that template that I have into a Bicep template or not? So let me come back to our presentation here. Oh, actually, in the meantime, we'll also just double check. Did we do another deployment? I don't think we did. No. So what we'll do is we'll go back here. While I'm talking about the process, we'll do another deployment, this time deploying the Bicep template with our changes. Just press save. And as that's deploying, we'll see if the changes that we've made to the names and such, because we also removed a property here, hopefully does not result in there being any problems. It seems as though, based on our research, remember, that this metadata information does need to stay. And the reason it needs to stay is because you need to know what the current stack is. That's actually an option when you go into the portal and try to deploy this via the portal. And as we've seen, just as we've seen in the ARM template, from the deployment from the portal, clearly Azure uses information and actually takes that information. If we go to parameters for a second, you can see that current stack is .NET. And I chose .NET when I actually did that deployment. So in which case, in this case, we're going to keep this here, even though it's highlighting it as red. And we're going to deploy it as such. Although here, in this case, we actually have an error. Please list deployment operations for details. Test RG was not found. Okay. Curious. Oh, I think I know what happened. Bizarre. I do have test RG. Oh, it did deploy. I think there was just an error. Not sure why there was an error, but it actually did deploy. That was a separate error. So hopefully we don't need to worry about that error. Cool. Let's finally go to the third slide, which is the process. Okay. We live in a world, we live in a company that has 1 million deadly ARM templates. Some are big, some are small. You need to decide as a business decision, do you keep them? Do you convert them to Bicep templates? Do you reauthor them, refactor them? What do you do with them? There's a small flowchart that I've made, hopefully that can help you decide on what you can do with them. So if we go from the left to the right, we have our original ARM template. Your decision is, do you want to convert to Bicep? Yes or no? This decision is really important. This is a business decision and can actually dictate how much time you may need to be spending with your templates, given the complexity and the specifics of your template. Will change from company to company, from team to team, from template to template. So there's nothing wrong with Bicep in this case. This is a business decision. It really just depends. You can do a test and see what happens when you actually try to convert one of your templates that are one of your main templates. And is it deployable and is it workable from that? But the main question you need to ask yourself, is it worthwhile? Is it worthwhile for you to actually convert these templates from ARM to Bicep? What do you mean worthwhile? As I mentioned earlier, some companies, you have engineers that just write anything and everything in an ARM template, and it works because they've somehow made it work. They found functions and things that just makes it work. They've Googled different pieces and snippets, gobbled it all up together, and it just about works because it deploys what they need. And at that point, they don't need to follow best practices and all these other pieces. But the problem is, from not following best practices, this will now creep into your Bicep file if you don't correct them, that is. So that is a business decision. Do you want to convert it or not? And is it worthwhile for your company, for your team, for these templates that you have at hand, and for the future of actually when you do need to author new templates, instead of authoring it in ARM, you can author it in Bicep. So if the answer is no, then you would write these Bicep files from scratch. And as we mentioned, because Bicep is in GA, it's much easier to author your templates in Bicep and just start from there. Bicep has a lot of compatibility and support from Microsoft, and you'll find that you're able to do a lot of things. And again, because ARM is still deployed, ARM is still supported for a long period of time. What you can do is you can just write your new templates in Bicep, have existing templates in ARM as you're converting them to Bicep. And any issues or problems you have, you can just write that template then in ARM. So Bicep is there to make things easier. And when it's potentially a bit difficult because of potentially any problems that you may come across, ARM is still there. And ARM isn't perfect either, but it is still there. We have a question actually from some prominent audience. Do you know the language used to make Biceps? Go, C#, Pi? I'm actually not sure. Microsoft obviously called it, it's one of their own languages that they've made. As for what it in the back end, I wouldn't know, unfortunately. I could try to get that information for you and let you. Cool. So we've gone through our binary decision-making process. We've chosen yes this time. So you know what? We want to keep these templates that we have. We think they're in a good state to convert. Let's try and convert it. We'll use that AZ command that we saw before, AZ, bicep, decompile -f, and then see the actual file and see what comes out. Okay, the next step of the process. Did the bicep file get created? If the bicep file did not get created, then you need to fix the original ARM template. So the problem was now with the original ARM template, using the error codes and details that appear. Now in our example, thankfully our our bicep template did get created. So because our bicep template did get created, I'd obviously go to yes in this case. But if after you run the decompile function or command and your bicep file did not get created, then you need to go back to your ARM template, look at the error code, see what comes out of it, and fix the ARM template. Then go back and try again. But if you now said yes, the bicep template did get created, we've got a converted bicep template. Fantastic. We're already 90% of the way there. We just need to now basically iron out the creases. Before we do that, we've got another question. Is Bicep faster to deploy than traditional ARM templates? The answer is no. No in the actual deployment itself. So in terms of when you're actually doing the deployment, how long it takes to deploy to Azure, it's exactly the same. And the reason being is because what happens is in the background, Microsoft is still using ARM templates. They're still using ARM templates because what they do is what's called a process of transpilation. They take this Bicep template that you have, they in the backend convert it to an ARM template for them to use, and then they deploy the infrastructure from there. So it's quite nice that the Bicep template has been created in a way to very much complement ARM because they're using it together. Okay, let's go back to our flowchart. We're right here. We've got a fantastic converted Bicep template as we had before. We want to just double check, can we deploy this new template to Azure? If we're able to deploy this new template to Azure, we're basically 99% of the way there now, because clearly there's no problems and nothing stopping us from deploying this to Azure. We'll obviously go into our resources, make sure everything's fine, but we check if we can actually deploy this Bicep template to Azure, this newly converted Bicep template. If the answer is no, and we're not able to actually deploy this to Azure, then we need to check the errors, see what's going on. We may need to use the deployment tab in the resource group, go into the deployment that had failed and see the details of that failed deployment, come back, fix the Bicep template, and let's try to deploy that Bicep template again. Okay, again, these are all very specific. It may seem like a long-winded case, but what we have here is the overall major flowchart for you to follow given the things that could happen. Doesn't mean that they necessarily will, but they could happen. We're now at the stage here now, can we deploy this new Bicep template? Let's say we fix the errors. Yes, we can. The final thing is then to change the symbolic names to make it easily readable so you know exactly what the resources are, and correct any additional errors that come out. It will be less errors now, more warnings, but they correct the warnings as and when is needed using the processes that we actually use today. I want to have them listed in the next slide as well. And out of that, you'll have a completed Bicep template. So again, just to summarize, again, the whole point of this this webinar, so that we make sure we stick to the whole point of it, is this is not about writing templates from scratch, because we said that writing templates from scratch is always a way to go. The Bicep template is fantastically supported, it's great. But if you already have ARM templates ready and you want to take advantage of Bicep and move forward to continually use Bicep, then it may be worthwhile for you to convert your ARM templates to Bicep templates. That's what the whole point of this webinar is for. So correcting errors, which is what we just did. This is sort of process that we kind of went through. If there are issues related to properties that maybe should or even shouldn't exist, then make a similar resource on the Azure portal, download the ARM template, or have a look at the ARM template and view the JSON properties. That's just like what we did. We looked at the portal deployment properties and we saw the metadata one was still there. Okay, cross-check on Microsoft documentation for the resource. We did that as well. We saw that the metadata one wasn't there. Okay, there's clearly an inconsistency here. Let's go to the GitHub repository for Bicep. Check the known bugs on that specific resource. So Google your specific problem. Let me go here. So this is from the portal deployment, and we looked at the fact that this was here. Then we said the next thing is look at the resource on the Microsoft documentation. So that was the Microsoft Web Sites resource. This is web app. And we saw that it wasn't there. Okay, clearly inconsistency. Check a specific error by typing the error into Google and see if a ticket has been raised for that. And you can see that there has been a ticket raised for this one. If there hasn't, maybe you need to raise a ticket, but have a look at the recent missing type validation or inaccuracies ticket. Again, we're going from very specific to more generic. And you can actually have a look at even more generic problems here on the main Bicep issues GitHub. So that would be the main sort of order of operations, if you will, what you should do when you get an error or a warning on your converted Bicep template. Newly converted Bicep templates, what you can do is you can actually convert them back to ARM. You can even compile them. This actually uses the compile function. So the reason why is because now you get to see what happens in the background. Don't let this slide confuse you. Remember everything we've just said in the previous slides. Take that as that is what it is. This slide is an additional slide for you to understand what you could do additionally to do some deeper dives. Let's explain what's happening here. When you author a template, let's say you've authored your Bicep template, you deploy it through whatever means you like, PowerShell, the CLI, Cloud Shell, even through a DevOps pipeline using the ARM template task. Here's your Bicep template. What happens in the background, as we mentioned, is that Azure transpilates or converts this Bicep template that you just created, and it converts it into an ARM template in JSON so that it can read it and then deploy your infrastructure into Azure. That answers the question from before. It's actually using an ARM template in the background. Okay, if you want to see what the ARM template is in the background, then you can just reconvert your Bicep template into an ARM template to see what it's actually looking at. You don't need to do this. This is an additional step, but this additional step can give you much more information sometimes if you don't get information out of the tickets on GitHub. Cool. The future. Here, Bicep is a fantastic resource, as mentioned, when you're trying to deploy Bicep templates from scratch. Again, as mentioned, if you're trying to convert your ARM templates, it does depend on compatibility, and it is always a best effort process. But constantly, the whole point of Bicep from Microsoft is that they are supporting it themselves. It's also completely free and it's open source. They are allowing anyone and everyone to contribute to these GitHub repos and actually help make this a better language and give better support for templating in Bicep. That hopefully means, because it only just recently got into GA, as time goes by, Bicep will become more and more powerful and more useful for your everyday use cases. If you can see a use case for Bicep now, then it may be worthwhile starting to use Bicep now. Bicep actually is wonderful to use, and its main competitors, Terraform and Pulumi, are one of the options that maybe you're looking at. Should we move to Terraform from our ARM templates because they are a bit convoluted and complex to use? In which case, is it even easy to convert your ARM templates into Terraform or Pulumi? Bicep actually has the opportunity, you have the opportunity to convert your templates from ARM to Bicep and then fix the errors that may appear as a result. But certainly, this is a well-supported language and templating syntax by Microsoft that you can actually use in the future for your business use cases. Finally, we'll leave it off at questions. I had answered 2 already, Francesca. So did I answer 2? I did answer 2, but if I didn't answer 2, I'll answer it one more time. So the question was, is it quicker to deploy Bicep templates basically than traditional ARM templates? And the answer is no, and that's because of just what we mentioned before here, that in the background, Microsoft, or rather Azure, they're using ARM templates. They'll grab your Bicep template, they'll transpilate it into an ARM template, translate it, convert it, and then they'll use that to deploy your resources. If your question is then, as a result, why should I use Bicep templates? If Microsoft and Azure is actually using ARM templates, then shouldn't I just not just provide them with an ARM template so it's easier? Well, remember what the point was. The point was readability and authorability. That's the whole point of using Bicep. It's easier to use and easier to write in. This is like an intermediate language for you to actually use when writing your templates. So if you think that is a benefit for you to take advantage of, then certainly take advantage of potentially writing new templates in Bicep and maybe converting your old templates, ARM templates into Bicep as well. We'll give some time now, hopefully, for any more questions to pop up. I'll just sort of give it on the side.
Yes, it looks like we don't have any more questions coming in.
Okay, fantastic.
So thank you so much, Adil. This was a really great session. And of course, thank you to everybody that joined us. And before we part ways, just a couple of reminders. You will receive the recording of this session as soon as it is available. We do have an end of webinar survey, and we truly appreciate your feedback. So if you could take a minute just to fill it out, it will pop up at the end of this webinar. And you can find more webinars on demand on our website, so on cloudacademy.com/webinars. So that's it for today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you again, Adil. That was really great. And until next time, goodbye, everybody.
Bye.